That's basically the wrong issue in the Oslo Accords and the peace process. It gave the right to Israel to define the final status of this area unilaterally without negotiations with Palestinians, which is against the terms of the agreement. But if you dig deep into the text, you'll find nothing to prevent Israel from doing that. Well, concerning the closure that came about after the last bombings in Jerusalem and Tel Aviv, first of all, you have two stories to that. The Israeli story, which states that this is legitimate security procedures, and the other story, which is the Palestinian story, talking about collective punishment. But more important is the problem of attitudes. In fact, the Israelis have set an example of a new way of treating Palestinians that can never really bring peace to this area. It's not only closing the so-called Israeli borders in front of Palestinians, but what we witnessed is the closure of Palestinian areas into small isolated cantons, which really convinced Palestinians that such arrangements are not livable, and therefore we have to find another formula or go back to intifada in order to correct the situation. Now, suffering during those periods were really tremendous, to the extent of that many people dying because of not being able to reach hospitals or have medical supplies. Gaza started to be in the edge of starvation, and I think that's the first time we are facing such a situation, which is pushing us to revising our commitment to what's called now the peace process and what sort of arrangements have been done through that. I think there have been a big mistake done there, and I think it's now crucial to revise the basis of the Oslo Agreement and all agreements that came after.
How do you think the Oslo Agreement should be revised?
Well, the Oslo Agreement should be revised according to one principle. I think the only way for us to reach a peaceful solution to the Palestinian-Israeli conflict is through two ways. One, Palestinians should be convinced that this is not revolutionary time, and therefore they have to adjust their means in order to achieve peace. And I think Palestinians have did tremendously well, but that does not exclude that there will be Palestinians who are going to go into extreme methods, but in general, Palestinians have done that. But the other requirement, which is very basic and very crucial, that Israelis should be convinced that they have to give back rights to Palestinians. Now, unfortunately, this did not happen. What Oslo brought to us is new arrangements to administrate the occupation and Israeli domination, which is totally rejected by us and proven by facts that it's not going to work. So I think the basic issue is to redefine the basic concept on which Oslo was based. There is no way that re-administrating the occupation would solve the problem, but rather Israelis have to think now clearly of the idea of giving back rights to Palestinians, and then I think we'll be at the edge of achieving peace in this area.
What is the new, you said new configuration of the occupation? What form does this new occupation take?
Well, the new occupation was clearly manifested in the last closure, where it appeared that what we have as Palestinians is only administration, and we have no sovereignty in any area in the West Bank. We are not having any integrity between our places, and we are being pushed to serve Israeli security interests only, without any regard to how are we going to be able to build our democratic civil society. In a sense, such a way is just reshaping the occupation rather than establishing basis for peace. And I think here where the negotiators goofed, And I think here is the essence of the problem. There is no way, if the issue of rights is not discussed, that the Palestinian community will be convinced that this is the way to achieve peace and future together. And I hope they will understand this pretty soon. And I hope that at least the election campaign in Israel will not be the dominant factor in reshaping the future of this area during the coming few months.
What rights continue to be denied the Palestinians?
Well, rights denied for Palestinians are sovereignty, integrity of land, right to stop any unilateral action that's oriented towards expropriating more land, and rights for security and build up a civil society, rights for exits and inlets free of the dominations of Israel. I think those are the basic rights that Palestinians are denied.
How do you feel this lack of freedom in your own life and in the work you do?
Well, in a sense, lack of freedom is really destroying everything good that we have established since 8 or 9 years. And not only that, but it's also damaging our attitudes towards our joint life in this area. In fact, I myself is struggling very deeply in order to maintain the kind of work I started, whether in the rapprochement center or in this office, which is related to creating cultural interaction between Palestinians, Israelis, and others. I can't move beyond 1 square kilometer, which is Bethlehem area. Not Bethlehem area, sorry. It's just the main 3 towns of Bethlehem, Beit Jala, and Beit Sahur. I have no access to anywhere. I can't even get my father to reach the hospital in Hebron, and at some point he was endangered for his life for this. And I look around me, I see that this is not the atmosphere we hope to create, and those arrangements are driving us crazy, and I think driving everybody in this area to become crazy. It's unipole arrangements that serves only one single interest. It's not the interest of the Israeli public, it's the interest of the Israeli politicians and government only, and their very narrow view of what nationalism or Zionism is in this area.
You said the other night that you think that the damage done by this closure after the bombings, and perhaps maybe you're referring also to the bombings on the Israeli side, that you think the damage is very, very deep, and that it might destroy any chances. Can you elaborate on that, or say why you think the damage at this point is so deep?
Well, I think the damage done by the bombings and the closure afterwards is not a passing phenomenon, because it reflects attitudes. And I think that in one sense, escalating the Palestinian struggle against the Israeli occupation in such a way of indiscriminate killing is devastating not only for Israelis but for us, and also is threatening us that at some point such senseless people might lead us into a civil war in the Palestinian areas. On the other hand, the Israeli attitudes, which is reflected by the policy of what's called the peace government in Israel towards Palestinians, is really reflecting the old Zionist strategy of dealing with this area. I haven't seen any reconciliation in such attitudes. I haven't seen responses only to security matters, but I have seen collective punishment becoming the major policy in Israel. I was really frightened when the president of Israel, Mr. Weizmann, stood and said, well, if there is a needle inside a big bush, I'll burn the whole bush in order to get it, which means that he's ready to burn all Palestinians if he wants someone who's called an extremist. Now, such attitude is really frightening, and it reflects the attitude of the government as much as the public, and I don't think that such a damage is easy to deal with or handle. I think things are going in the wrong direction. I'm very worried about the future, and I should admit, I cannot be optimistic anymore until I see real changes on the ground. Well, even if we exclude the area after the bombings and go before that, talking about the start of the peace process until that period, things were not really reflecting a bright picture, but rather it was really obvious that there are a lot of unilateral actions taken by Israel, regardless of the agreement, in order to get Palestinians to be confined into closed, disintegrated cantons. There have been a real speed up of settlement activities, a huge expropriation of land, and let's not forget that land is the most important and basic issue in the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. And anyone who does not address this issue will be mistaken if he thinks that he can solve the problem. On the contrary, Israel was addressing this issue in an unilateral way to reshape the final status the way that reflects their interests only and pushing Palestinians into the corner. Now, that's basically the wrong issue in the Oslo Accords and the peace process. It gave the right to Israel to define the final status of this area unilaterally without negotiations with Palestinians, which is against the terms of the agreement. But if you dig deep into the text, you'll find nothing to prevent Israel from doing that. What added to the problem is those bypass roads. And those bypass roads ended up to be a huge program to expropriate thousands and thousands of dirhams of land and integrate the major parts of the Palestinian areas into Israel with the settlements and disintegrate any continuity with the Palestinian areas. Now, under such conditions, you cannot convince us that we are moving in the right direction. Nobody noticed at that time, until the bombings, that things are not going in the right direction, and everybody celebrated peace. While the ones who really suffered here were the people who have been witnessing that every day and night. The other problem is, so far, nobody recognized that the Israeli occupation is still in existence on more than 90% of the West Bank. And it's not logical to outlaw any Palestinian peaceful resistance against this occupation. It's possible that we should outlaw any violent, indiscriminate killing at any side, but there is no way with the existence of occupation that you can deny Palestinian right to resist and use legitimate, acceptable means to do that. And this is also a serious problem, because at one point we see attempts to outlaw any Palestinian attempt to cry, scream, and resist. On the other hand, we see still expropriation of land and taking over of more land and building more settlements on that land and disintegrating our areas rather than integrating them. And all of this was leading us to this clashing point. I wasn't really expecting that it will be that bloody and that difficult, but anyone who used his mind was feeling that we are approaching a clashing point, and I hope we can overcome that at some point. I'm not really optimistic about this, but this is the land of surprises. I don't know. As one example of land expropriation and settlement building is the settlement of Har Huma to be built at the borders of Beit Sahur and Beit Lahm. And this area was expropriated by the Israeli government in 1991. More than 1,900 dunams of land were expropriated, and plans to build a huge settlement that could accommodate up to 30,000 additional settlers at our border were established. We tried our best to fight against it and convince the Israelis that it's not wise to do this, especially in peace times and during peace negotiations, and that this area should be kept for its population to be able to develop it the way they like. But we failed. We failed in the Supreme Court. We failed in all committees we protested to. We failed in lobbying with the Israeli government. And we have seen that the Israeli attitude was only to achieve what they call Israeli national interests. Now, if the Israeli national interest is going to continue being taking more Palestinian land and building more Israeli settlement on them, creating a Jewish majority at the borders of Beit Lahm, and disintegrating Palestinian areas, I don't see how they are going to create livable conditions for Palestinians here. I don't see how in future Palestinians will be able to build for themselves anything that's viable and livable. And therefore, I don't see peace being processed here. I see more attempts to destroy the only chance we have had to start a dialogue by unilateral actions.
You've worked a lot for peace by creating dialogue groups between Israelis and Palestinians over 7 years or so? Longer? 8 years? 8 years? What do you think the changes have been in those dialogues over the years since the Intifada and what's going on now in the
I have been working for the last 8 years in creating chances for Palestinian-Israeli grassroots dialogue. And I think me and my group have achieved a lot in bringing thousands of people to meet each other in open dialogues to talk about everything, present time, problems, history, future. And I think we have created this missing link of communication between both communities in a small scale, which we hoped will expand. We faced a lot of problems during our work. We managed to survive the Gulf War. We started in the Intifada times, and we managed to survive many of the ugly things that happened, like the Hebron massacre, the Aqsa massacre, and many other unpleasant events that happened. So far, we are facing a real and serious danger, which is it's not only closing up the territories and preventing us from moving into Israeli areas, but now Israelis are closing the Palestinian territories in front of Israelis. And physically now we are not able to meet. Whether in Jerusalem or in Beit Sahur, it's becoming more and more impossible. And people are taking a lot of risks in order to come and meet each other, which is unbelievable that people are closing the borders in front of peacemakers, and they are not able to close the borders in front of the ones who are damaging the peace process, whether by bombings or settlement activities. And this is exactly the pain of this process, that people are fighting against the wrong side.
What do you think total separation means?
Well, talking about total separation is more or less a joke. Israel, during the last 28 years, have created a situation that makes separation totally impossible with their settlement activities and with the kind of geographic arrangements they played here. And there is nothing called total separation except total cantonization of Palestinians in their areas. If total separation will mean total cantonization of Palestinians in isolated areas, that's creating an apartheid system, and that's bringing us back to a new round of violence in this area. Well, are there chances for real national separation? I doubt it. I hope we won't be opting at separation. We'd be opting at building two nations with bridges of confidence and cooperation. And I don't see what's happening now fitting this image, but rather fitting the idea of cantonizing the areas and isolating Palestinians in those cantons. I think they are creating the Palestinian ghettos now.
How have your feelings changed about the resistance work that you do since the Intifada and now?
Well, it's true that we ran through difficult times during our work at the Rapprochement Center. And we should remember that Rapprochement started as a project immediately after the Intifada, which means that Rapprochement was a project in wartime, not in peace times. And I think that's what's good about Rapprochement. It's an attempt to get the warriors to sit and talk. And I think we managed to do this pretty much. We managed to get the people who are engaged, who are part of the warriors, the ones who were struggling against the Israeli occupation, and the Israelis who serve in the Israeli army to come and meet. And that helped us in moving through war times, and that's how we managed to overcome those crises, massacres, bloodshed, and other things, because people were not talking that we are now in a state of peace and we are trying to reshape our relations, but rather we are in a state of war and we are trying to talk about it. Now, it's really obvious for us that this work was expanding and flourishing. And the only major problem we are facing now is not a problem of attitude, but a problem of logistics. We are logistically prevented from meeting each other by the Israeli procedures. We cannot reach them, they cannot come to us, and that's why we prepared the next dialogue to be at the checkpoint in order to be able to run our dialogues even under such circumstances.
Which checkpoint would that be?
Well, most probably the checkpoint we are going to meet at will be the checkpoint on the other side of Beit Sahur, going to nearby Har Huma settlement, the suggested Har Huma settlement. Well, Jerusalem stands as one of the most important problems we are facing. Since the Gulf War, 1991, Jerusalem was closed, whether totally or permanently, in front of Palestinians. And the effect was really tremendous, because Jerusalem used to serve as our capital in a sense of having most of our educational system, health, religious aspirations oriented towards there. And Jerusalem used to be the major commercial center for Palestinians. Closing Jerusalem in front of Palestinians meant starting the process of death for East Jerusalem. And you can see that clearly, that most of the merchants there are leaving their jobs because there are no customers. Most of their customers were coming from our areas. Churches and mosques are becoming more of museums, and there is no local community there, except when they are allowed to go during feast times only, and that's run through certain permits that not everybody can get. Most of our well-equipped hospitals are sited in Jerusalem, and that's making life much more painful for people because they cannot access adequate medical treatment. But more than that, Jerusalem for us is our heart, and there is no way, even if we were disconnected physically from Jerusalem, that we can be disconnected spiritually from Jerusalem. We'll be all the time looking at Jerusalem and probably restating next year in Jerusalem. And unfortunately, we are not talking about people who are living 3,000 or 2,000 miles away from Jerusalem, but people who are only 3 miles away from Jerusalem and unable to reach the place that they respect and pray in and also aspirate to as the essence not only of their nationality but also the essence of their life in this area.
Can you say also how long it's been since you haven't been able to go to Jerusalem and how it has affected your work, say at Bir Zeit and elsewhere?
Well, since the Gulf War, I haven't been able to go to Jerusalem, but in some occasions I was able to get some permits to be able to pass through Jerusalem. And those were rare occasions, actually. Most of the time for me, in order to reach my work at Bir Zeit University, where Jerusalem is really in the middle of between Beit Sahur, Bethlehem area, and Ramallah, where Bir Zeit University is sited, I was forced to take another route, which takes me down to Jericho, and then I have to climb up to Bir Zeit, and this is at least double the time and double the distance. It's really a very hilly road and very scary road. That's why people are calling that road the Fire Valley. And it's risky to travel at this road, but I was forced to do it because I was interested in keeping my job at Bir Zeit University. Concerning my work in this office, alternative tourism and rapprochement, it was really very harmful for us not to be able to go to Jerusalem and not to be able to travel and move freely, because without that there is no way that we can promote our work and advance it. In a sense, personally, I'm looking to the day, I'm dreaming about the day in which I'll be able simply to go to the church in Jerusalem and pray. Unfortunately, I can't do that. I don't know how it's possible that someone who wants to go and pray needs a permit from the military governor of the area he lives in, and in most of the times he's denied access. Probably we have to go back to what Jesus told us. Pray inside your room and close your door. And well, we'll do that for the moment, but nobody can prevent us from all the time looking towards Jerusalem and saying, next year in Jerusalem.
One last question for me. I've been talking to you, this is my third interview with you over 7 years. The situation now seems, in some ways, as you've described it, even more frustrating and more embittering than it did in the Intifada. And I wonder how you and people like you continue year after year to resist, to try to meet with Israelis. I'm curious about what it is that keeps you going, how you survive it.
I'm not sure how are we surviving, and I'm really in a serious internal conflict, and I'm not pretty sure that I still and my friends have the energy to continue in the way we started our work in. All circumstances are trying to convince us to quit such a work and go back to the old rules of the game. But I believe that the old rules of the game are dangerous and inhuman. And that's the only reason why I'm keep sticking to the new rules we tried to establish, hoping that at some point there will be some light at the end of the tunnel. I can't see that light now, and I'm very frank about this, but maybe at some point we'll see it.